Why did Trump win? There is no question that Trump's re-election is the most impressive political comeback in recent memory. And if you know my political views, you know I am not a fan of Donald Trump. I think, to use a non-scholarly word, I think it's a scumbag, an idiot, and many other things. But there is no question that Trump's election is the most impressive political comeback in recent memory. Just a fact. And first, the good news. Money did not buy the election. Kamala Harris overspent Trump about 2-1, and that she still lost. Supporters of Donald Trump, like Elon Musk, were very publicized, but if you count all the money that went into this campaign, Kamala Harris had more money. So whatever the reason for Trump's victory, money is not one of them. Now, my analysis, well, first of all, before we go into my analysis, just in case you didn't look at the numbers, Trump didn't just win in a few states. You know, everybody was talking about the swing states. Trump won throughout the country. Even in the states where he lost by a lot less than expected. Trump did consistently better in all the states. In states like Florida and Texas, that the Democrats were hoping maybe to win, that he won big time. And in states like Massachusetts, New York, and California, where he was expected to lose big time, he lost, but not by very little, basically. In fact, Kamala Harris, unfortunately for her, it was the Democratic candidate's worst performance since, I believe, 1988. 156 million people voted in 2024. That's actually 2 million fewer than in 2020. And that tells you that the motivation to vote was not very high, actually, for some people. Biden, in 2020, Biden beat Trump 81 million to 74, more than 7 million difference. In 2024, Trump got 77 million votes and Harris only 75. So Harris lost 6 million from Biden and Trump got 3 extra million. So 3 million people moved from Biden's camp to Trump's camp, and another 2 million didn't vote. These are just the numbers. The number of people who didn't vote, by the way, was particularly shocking here in California, a state where people were expected to be so motivated against the neo-fascist Trump. Only 16 million people voted in 2024, which is almost 2 million fewer than in 2020. So the big chunk of the people who didn't vote were actually exactly in California. And that's despite the fact that the number of registered voters increased by 500,000. The only consolation for the people who don't like Trump is that Trump did not win the majority of votes. If you count all the votes, he won for a little less than 50% of the votes, and Kamala Harris won 48.4. Trump won 49.9, but not 50. So Trump ran 3 times for president, and he never won 50% of the votes. That's the only consolation for the people who don't like Trump. Now, as many analyses of why Trump won. I start with, in my opinion, the simplest one. First of all, Trump was one of the most unpopular candidates in history. Most people in his own party didn't want him to run. He never had an approval rating over 50%. Well, guess what? He won twice, against Hillary Clinton, a woman, and against Kamala Harris, a woman. He lost big time when he ran against a man, Joe Biden. So my simplest analysis is that any woman running for president in the United States starts with a handicap, and we can discuss how much. It's mostly psychology, it's subconscious. Even women probably tend to trust a man better than a woman. She knew this, in my opinion, because she never wore skirts throughout the campaign. You always saw her wearing pants. Trump is a man, a white man, and she's a woman, and a woman of color. But I think the biggest handicap is woman. And it doesn't matter that Trump is very old and rambling and has all these past scandals. Kamala Harris had no major scandal, nothing to compare with Trump's infinite list of let's call it misbehavior. And still, I think the millions of whites, blacks, Hispanics, Chinese, Indians are united in preferring a man over a woman as a boss. And so that's my simplest analysis. There is no place in the United States where being a woman is a plus for a political or executive career. I don't think even in California. I'm based in Silicon Valley, and we have our own problems with women in executive positions. Being a woman is a plus for being a secretary, flight attendant, a nurse, and so on, but not for being in charge of a corporation or an institution. That's my opinion. Now, most analysts say it's a Democrats who lost, and they start listing all the things that Democrats did wrong. If it's so obvious, of course, you wonder why the Democrats didn't fix it before. Anyway, inflation, immigration, crime, etc. And I agree with all of them. I think many people were angry about these factors. But fundamentally, in all of these issues, there was a dissonance between the reality experienced by the middle class and what the Democrats were saying. Democrats were totally incapable of explaining things, and that includes Kamala Harris. Let's start with inflation. Inflation, apparently, if you believe the polls, inflation was the single biggest issue of the election, but Democrats kept insisting that the economy was in excellent shape, and many in the media kept promoting this theory, which, if you look at the numbers, is actually true. You know, the United States has relatively low inflation, certainly the lowest unemployment in the Western world. GDP growth is pretty good under Biden. In fact, probably higher than in China, because China always inflates the numbers. So maybe for the first time in 30-40 years, the United States economy grew more than China's. But Biden kept repeating that there was at the beginning he kept repeating that inflation was not a big deal, it was just a spike, and that momentary spike then ended up lasting throughout these 4 years. The most powerful publicity is not the ads that you blast on television, is the price of the tomato when you go to the grocery store. Every time the family went to the grocery store, was reminded of inflation just by looking at the price of tomatoes and eggs. And that, in my opinion, prevailed over any statement and advertising on TV. Now, Democrats were totally incapable of explaining the causes of inflation. First of all, you have to admit that there is inflation, and that it is a big problem. And then you can explain that it wasn't actually only Biden's fault. In fact, Biden had a very minor role in inflation. Inflation was all over the world, first thing to say, and I didn't really hear Democrats explaining to people that inflation is also in Europe, and in places like Argentina and Turkey is a lot more. The number one cause of inflation, any economist can tell you, it's government spending. George W. Bush is the one who started spending astronomical amount of money. Obama did. Donald Trump did. He added trillions of dollars to the deficit. Then another cause of inflation, so it was not just Biden. Then another cause of inflation was obviously the tariffs on Chinese goods. And it's amazing that nobody explained to people that the tariff is a tax. There was basically a 10% tax on the things that the middle class buys, not the rich elite. The rich elite doesn't buy Chinese shoes, they buy Italian shoes. But the middle class buys Chinese shoes and Chinese socks and things made with Chinese components. So there was a 10% tax, and eventually it showed up in the prices. Then Obama made a deal with Iran that would have released Iran's oil. Now Iran has, if I'm correct, 12% of the world's oil reserves. Well, Trump, first thing he did, he killed that deal. Maybe with good reasons, but still, he killed the deal and he removed 12% of the world's oil reserves off the oil market. Eventually, that did something to the price of oil. And another cause of inflation, in my opinion, was Trump's campaign against illegal immigrants. We can discuss forever. Maybe if I have time, I'll say it later. But anyway, one simple thing that the illegal immigrants do is they keep labor prices low. Once you remove them, labor prices increase. So this last one is my personal opinion. But the government spending, the tariffs, and so these are facts. I mean, obviously they all contribute to inflation. So it wasn't just Biden's fault, but the Democrats. The point is that Democrats were totally incapable of explaining this simple fact. So it was not difficult to explain it, but the Democrats kept saying that the economy is in good shape, and therefore they didn't have to explain it. And by the way, at one point Obama said something right in one of his speeches. Instead of denying that Trump had a better economy, Obama said, well, it was my economy. Well, we can discuss, but why the Democrats didn't say that? To all the people who believe that Trump had a better economy, why don't you say, well, that's because Obama fixed the problem. In fact, Obama, I think in the last quarter of his presidency, had an astronomical GDP growth rate. And then Trump inherited that economy. So anyway, the point is not that the economy was great. The point is that the Democrats were incapable of explaining whose fault it is for the inflation. And one reason why they were unable to explain it is of course the fact that Biden didn't change much from Trump. Contrary to what the right-wing media kept saying, they kept accusing Biden of being a socialist. The reality is that Biden was Trump 2.0. Biden never repealed the tariffs on Chinese goods. In fact, he got even tougher than Trump on China. Didn't resurrect the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which in my opinion is one of the biggest mistakes that Trump did. Gave China a huge advantage in geopolitics. Longest story. Biden kept the new NAFTA negotiated by Trump, kept the sanctions on Iran, and even extended the tariffs on washing machines and on imported solar panels. I mean, there's a long list of things that Biden simply inherited from Trump and didn't change, and so that's also the reason why the Democrats had trouble blaming Trump, because Biden didn't do anything to undo what Trump did. Biden, by the way, did undo the surrender to the Taliban in Afghanistan. That was signed by Trump. That was Trump's idea. He signed the surrender, and then Biden simply executed. Trump moved the US Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, something that created a lot of hostility, and Biden kept it there. And Russia remained in Syria and Ukraine. Ukraine was invaded in 2014. And, Trump didn't do anything, Biden didn't do anything. Russia was in Syria, Biden didn't do anything. So, analyze and you see that names changed, but the Biden administration kept in place many of the Trump policies. Among the things that they introduced is this CHIPS and Science Act, $280 billion, and that subsidizes the US producers of microprocessors. Well, that sounds a lot like Make America Great Again, America First. So he was a protectionist. Biden was a protectionist, just like Trump. Call it socialist or whatever you want to call it, but Biden's industrial and trade policies were just Trump's policies. Now, another dissonance, going back to the dissonance between the Democratic Party and the people, was on immigration. Again, you can explain things, but only if you admit that there is a problem first. And for a long time, the Democrats didn't want to admit that there was a problem. It was clearly ridiculous that millions of foreigners were crossing from Mexico under the eyes of powerless border guards. There were smartphone apps that guided illegal immigrants into the United States step by step. And the Democrats kept claiming that the president cannot do anything about it until Biden actually did something and stopped the flow. Actually, again, you can explain what causes the problem, and they still haven't explained it. It's not that all these people, all these illegal immigrants are evil people who want to come to America to kill and rape, like Trump says. And most crimes are committed by white Anglo-Saxon Americans. Most serial killers are white Anglo-Saxon Protestant young people between the age of 20 and 35. I can go on and on. Statistics say that these illegal immigrants are responsible for a very teeny percentage of crime. Anyway, these people come, leave their families behind, leave their homes behind. They come from countries that have been destabilized, typically by drugs and guns. Now, drugs are sold to the United States. If you go to Guatemala or even Mexico, not many people do drugs. In the United States, a lot of people do drugs. So the money for the drug cartels comes from the United States, and then the drug cartels illegally cross the border with a valid passport, go to Texas, buy guns, and bring them back to Mexico. And so the United States actually is causing the problems. And then for the people who live in these countries, the choice is work for the cartel or move. So anyway, the solution is not a wall, though the wall probably would work to some extent, but the real solution would be to stop buying drugs. Instead of buying drugs, start buying bananas, avocados, or whatever, and stop selling guns. So anyway, Democrats incapable of explaining very simple things. Incidentally, also Democrats incapable of explaining that there are benefits. Yes, the illegal immigrants are illegal, so they shouldn't be here. So we all agree on this in principle. But don't forget, the illegal immigrants mostly take jobs that nobody wants. Even when they compete with citizens, like they compete with the handyman, well, they lower costs. I mean, most middle-class families, at least in California, they cannot afford a handyman. A handyman here can cost you $60, $80, $100, depending where you live. And the illegal immigrant will work for $20. I mean, whether it's morally right or wrong, these illegal immigrants lower costs for thousands, indirectly millions of families. Not only that, these illegal immigrants are also consumers. They buy things, they pay rent, they shop. So they're not just cheap labor, they are consumers. So it's a long story, it's not simple, but the Democrats were totally incapable of explaining these simple things to the middle class. Yes, it is sunny in California. That's why we have fires all the time. Biden then is responsible, just blamed for the wars in Ukraine and Palestine because he's weak. I mean, if you go to the Middle East, everybody at the cafe, on a bus, can tell you Hamas was motivated by the transfer of Israel capital to Jerusalem. It was like the last straw. And by the peace process between Israel and Saudi Arabia. These are things that Trump did. Right or wrong, these are things that Trump did. Trump is the one who abandoned Syria to Assad, protected by Putin. The war in Ukraine was started under Obama in 2014. That's the truth. Trump did nothing to stop that invasion. And then in 2022, Russia invaded massively. Now, note that 2022 came after 2020. What happened in 2020? Well, there was a failed revolution in Belarus. The people of Belarus were about to topple their dictator, and Russia supported the dictator, and Trump did nothing. And I think Russia was encouraged. It was a sign from Trump that the United States would not defend those countries. So, again, if you want to defend Biden, there are ways, but the Democrats were totally incapable. And as I said, the disgraceful, certainly disgraceful retreat from Afghanistan, the Democrats somehow were incapable to explain that Trump is the one who signed the surrender in Qatar. It was in Qatar that Trump met the Taliban after meeting a lot of other bad people, like North Korea's dictator. Then somehow Democrats stopped talking about guns. I mean, there was, I guess there was no mass shooting during the campaign, so the thing was forgotten. Actually, guns are the #1 killer of US citizens. Not immigrants, not the Taliban, not Hamas. It's the average US citizen who owns guns, and guns kill a lot of US citizens. And when a kid tried to assassinate Donald Trump, it was unbelievable that no Democrat was capable of saying, well, what every foreigner noticed, wow, a kid was able to buy a gun to shoot at the president. In most countries of the world, it's really difficult to buy a gun to start with, period. If it's so easy to buy a gun, yes, statistically you will have somebody who buys a gun to assassinate a politician. And then the whole Black Lives Matter, it's the police brutality. Why the police in the United States is more likely to shoot an innocent? Well, because criminals have guns, lots of guns. So if you're a cop, well, you shoot first because survival of the fittest. I mean, if you are a cop in countries like Austria, where murders are very rare, you probably don't need to shoot. It's very unlikely the criminal has gun. But in the United States, I can see the police brutality means something else. It means the cops are trying to defend themselves. I mean, it's a preemptive strike. So, Kamala Harris was really, from this point of view, Kamala Harris was a really bad candidate because she was incapable of addressing these issues. Trump had simple answers to complex questions. The answers, 90% of the time, were incredibly stupid, incompetent, ignorant. But Harris was only capable of what they called the word salad, blah, 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 blah. And in fact, the one time where I liked Fox News is when Fox News interviews Kamala Harris, and the Fox News interviewer lost his patient. I was also losing my patience. She was not answering the questions. On the other hand, Democrats spent a lot of time, energies, and money to defend causes that are important only for teeny minorities, and sometimes they even upset the silent majority. The transgender issue, oh my God, it became such a big topic of discussion, and the Democrats were not able to stop talking about it. And obviously it was bait. The right wing kept bringing it up, and the Democrats kept trying, were dancing around the issue instead of simply saying it's not an important issue. It's certainly not a priority. There are many problems in this world, but certainly the transgender issue is not a priority. Having transgender bathrooms is not a priority, especially when there is inflation, there's an invasion of illegal immigrants, and so on. Instead, we were discussing LGBTQ, which is becoming one of the most hated acronyms in the United States. And Black Lives Matters. Black Lives Matter in the end, yes, of course Black Lives Matter, but I mean white lives matter, and Hispanic lives matter, and Chinese lives matter, and so on. And instead, this led to the idea of defund the police, which increased crime in the very black communities that were already the victims of police brutality. And so, at the end, white, Hispanics, Chinese, and blacks themselves felt that the government was not protecting them. So the Democrats spent a lot of time and energy and money on these issues. And then there was the culture war. The culture war is real. I also feel it when I write. Oh my God, if I write something slightly offensive to black people, slightly implying whatever about gays, I start getting emails, even threatening emails, certainly emails that accuse me of being racist and this and that and that and that. So that went too far. It annoys, I think, everybody actually. I mean, most people think Columbus' discovery of America was a heroic feat. Maybe it was not heroic, but it was certainly a very important moment. The history of the world changed. I mean, if anybody wants to go back to the age of the Maya and the Incas, I don't think that you would really like that. Many people think Christmas is the most important day of the year. What's wrong with that? And all these things became, many people, not only whites, I'm very familiar with the Chinese community and the Indian community. Many people believe that whites created a free and wealthy nation, and that does not change the fact that there was slavery, that especially Native Americans were exterminated. I think we often underestimate what happened to the Native Americans. And not only that, I mean, the Chinese were treated like, not slaves, like animals. I mean, we can go on forever on all the injustices. And, you know, that the United States stole California, Arizona, and so on from Mexico. And then Florida from Spain. I mean, we could go on and on forever. Yes. But the Democrats were investing on this issue so much that it became a culture war. You have to be careful what you say. And so the New York Times, I mean, it was incredible. At one point, the New York Times had a lengthy editorial to explain why the word black has to be capitalized, but not the word white. So when we say a black person, it has to be capitalized, but when we say a white person, it's okay not to be capitalized. And then you're not sure what do I do with the Chinese. Just, you know, it sounded like for the Democrats, the culture war mattered more than inflation, and unfortunately that was also the perception of the middle class in general. Oh, they care more about deciding if we have to honor Columbus or not than about the price of the tomatoes. Okay, fine. I care more about the price of the tomatoes, and then, you know, people would vote based on that. And by the way, polls in swing states, not all over America, but in swing states, I don't remember which ones, showed that most people were actually optimistic about the economy. So I think that a lot of people actually didn't vote just on inflation, on the economy. and I'll come back. I think non-material issues were important. Now, back to the culture war, though. The Democrats kept saying, we defend democracy and free speech, because they kept saying Trump is the number one threat to democracy and free speech. But the middle class, not only middle class, also intellectuals, they felt that it's the Democrats that were threatening democracy and free speech, precisely because of the culture war. This idea of cancel opinions. If you have an opinion, I know for a fact that a lot of slave traders were Africans. When the Portuguese arrived in some places, they found Africans selling slaves, and they bought them. Well, if you write this, there are people who will ask you to be cancelled, to stop writing. This is censorship, and careers were destroyed because something was said that somehow was not aligned with the politically correct speech. Statues were decapitated. Decapitate yourself. We're all guilty. We all benefit from the society, from the United States that was created by all these injustices. So it's kind of silly to try to destroy the history. You can admit what was wrong based on today's morals, by the way. The morals back then were very different. As I said, there was also slavery in Africa practiced by black people on black people. You can say this, today's ethics is different. We think this is really, really, really bad. If anybody does it, we fight against it. But you can't just decide that this cannot be discussed. So anyway, all these things about the culture war de facto was perceived by many as the real threat to free speech. And so in the end, it helped Trump, in my opinion. And this also transferred to education. Parents already were hurt by the lockdowns of the COVID pandemic. Their children were left behind. I don't have children, but I can see if you have children, that's a big concern. My children are 1 year behind. On top of that, schools start talking about all these issues of all this cultural issue, the political correct things and not, and so I can see that parents got exasperated. They got really annoyed. I want my children to learn math and yes, history and geography and so on, and I don't want my children to be indoctrinated about what is right and wrong in the English language. So anyway, I can see that non-material factors may have been as important as the material ones. Okay, all this the Democrats totally misunderstood how people want to defend free speech. They want to defend. They are tired. You cannot say the N word. They are tired. You cannot say this and that. You're going to use that word and so on and so on. There's a limit, and I think there's a point where a lot of people perceive this as the real censorship. Okay, real happening, and then yes, maybe Trump wants to introduce a worse censorship, but that we'll see. And on the other hand, the censorship of the culture wars is here today. You have to be careful what you say. Yes, so we created this strange situation. I put myself in this camp. I'm not a Democrat, but I'm anti-Trump. I'm in that bandwagon. We created this situation where we kept accusing Trump of lies and exaggerations. Absolutely true. This guy, but basically only the college educated class was listening. Like Democrats thought, I also thought that it was a big deal that Trump said Haitians eat dogs and cats. But it turns out that it wasn't. The big deal was that there's censorship in in the words you can use, that not this politically correct things. And also, I mean, again, people were checking the price of tomatoes. They were watching on TV illegal immigrants cross the border, and so they were annoyed by discussions. They were desperate to get a good education for their children, and then there's this culture war. So the lies and exaggeration of Trump became just a footnote, just something funny. Then the discussion about young people also links here. It's another long story. But forget for a second the lies and exaggerations that Trump is famous for, and they got worse as he got old. And you know, the Republicans themselves didn't like his policies. But I think a lot more people, especially young people, don't forget young people were sometimes too young to remember the first Trump term. They actually ended up liking the personality, the Trump personality. People like me were just focused on the fact he's a liar, he's probably a criminal. I also think he's a traitor in that he colluded with Russia one way or another. I believe many, many bad things about Trump. But I mean, you cannot deny that this guy survived an assassination attempt and shouted "fight, fight," raising the fist instead of simply ducking and running. He survived countless trials and accusations, attempts to disqualify him, and he became president. He won. I mean, you must admit that to many people this looks impressive. This looks like, well, unfortunately, like a role model. You know, it's so even the fact that you know, Democrats assume that so many, even Republicans and independents, disliked Trump personally. I'm not so sure actually anymore. Way back, yes. Now I'm not so sure. And of course, Democrats also overestimated how much young people truly care for environment, climate change, racial equity, peace in the world, and so on. Unfortunately, that's not true. Young people grow up on a regime of hip-hop lyrics, first-person shooter video games, superhero movies. I can go on. Not all of them, of course, but enough of them that probably, and of course social media, all the chaos on social media. So I'm not sure that at the end young people care that much about climate change. That sounds very abstract. And they get their news on 1-minute videos, not from the New York Times. And don't forget, and don't blame them for voting Trump. What was the other option? If you don't want to vote for Biden, who do you vote for? A 30-year-old never had a chance to vote for a Republican who is not Trump. Do the math. So it is not that their fault that Trump and not Nikki Haley was chosen. Anyway, there's also dissonance. This may be a more abstract, but it's not right-wing, left-wing. There's a new divide between college-educated people and non-college people. Biden and the Democrats can claim correctly that the stock market hit a record value, GDP growth is pretty good, unemployment is very low, and so on. And this translate into higher income for college-educated people, but not necessarily for people who don't have a college degree and work in a factory or in a farm. And by emphasizing college degrees, the Democrats, in a sense, undermined the dignity of labor. You know, people who work in a factory are very important for society. It's a valuable job without which we wouldn't survive. Should their children get a college degree? I think so, but you have to explain it. You can't just say, you can't just undermine the dignity of the people who don't have a college degree. You have to explain why a college degree is important, and then you have to make it easy for their children to get a college degree. And you have to explain that the real issue is social mobility. Social mobility is now higher in socialist Europe than in capitalist USA. US analysts like to criticize Europe. The socialist system of Europe is so static, blah blah, and the truth is the opposite. The numbers show that you are more likely to get, a poor person is more likely to do well financially in Europe than in the United States now. So these are things that nobody explained. The child of poor parents is more likely to get rich in Europe than in the United States. This is a major change since the old days. The welfare state of socialist Europe has actually worked pretty well. And that's the welfare system that the Democrats promise. The individual meritocracy of the United States has failed since probably Reagan years. But nobody's explaining this to the middle class. The Democrats live in this cloud where they don't need to explain these things. There is another divide that is not related to ideology, to political parties. It's about progress, technological progress. The United States is the nation of Benjamin Franklin, Edison, Bell, and so on. For 3 centuries, the United States has been enthusiastic about the idea of progress. Inventors and scientists were national heroes. There was a trend in the other direction, but ironically, it was mostly the leftists, the communists, the socialist intellectuals who were attacking progress. And now the opposite is happening. Now there is a trend, especially among the right wing, against progress, against technology, because that benefits who? The college-educated class. And then of course there's a massive disinformation on the internet that nobody knows how to control, that has attacked just about every scientific theory. Just look at what happened during COVID. Even simple things like the mask became politicized. So people have become skeptical about technology and innovation. There's a writer, Virginia Postrel, who saw this coming. She published a book titled The Future and Its Enemies. So, people wonder, is progress good or bad, and for whom is progress good? And that's actually a good question. Now, social media were disparaged by the college-educated class, including me, people like me. We think there's a lot of garbage on Facebook, especially Twitter, now on TikTok and so on. But we must admit that social media are the vehicle through which the silent majority can vent its frustrations about the things I call dissonances, the different perception of reality. The social media where they go and they find a home. And the far right has been much better at meeting these people on social media, meeting the working class, the average American on social media. So we can argue forever about the disinformation that is widespread on social media. But the point is not the disinformation. The point is what stands behind the disinformation. Why people so easily believe that kind of disinformation. And we fail to analyze that. It's funny that Trump's own allies, supporters, were so exasperated by how he was conducting his campaign. A campaign of lies and insults and conspiracy theories. His own allies were panicking, were saying it looks like he wants to lose. They kept advising him to focus on the issues, on the numbers, not on insulting Kamala Harris. Well, guess what? 70 plus million people voted for him. So it looks like Trump knows the nation better than the politicians and pundits who were advising him. And by the way, it is not the first time that scandals don't matter. Clinton's affair with Monica Lewinsky in 1998, for those who are old enough to remember, throughout that scandal, Clinton's approval rating hit, if I'm not mistaken, a record 73%. 73% today is unthinkable for a politician. And it was in the middle of a sex scandal. So, people care about these things, but to an extent. So, anyway, so morality did not matter in this election, like it or not, and unfortunately that's been true for more than 20 years. Trump insulted blacks, Hispanics, Chinese. Guess what? Trump won among blacks. I mean, that's relatively speaking. He won votes. He won more votes than before among blacks, Hispanics, Chinese, Indians, and so on. It turns out that the very immigrants and minorities that the Democrats were defending shifted towards Trump, which means they cared more about the economy and the culture wars than about moral values and hypothetical dictatorships. It is white people, it turns out. Kamala Harris won more votes among white people than Biden. It's white people who actually care about the Constitution, defending democracy, saving the earth, minority rights, and so on. And my explanation, because college-educated people are mostly white. I don't know if there's another reason. And then there's this paradox of the right-wing media that is really, for me, it's really hard to swallow. The right-wing media have been wrong every single time. Fox News. And when he was alive, Rush Limbaugh. In 2003, Saddam Hussein did not have weapons of mass destruction. In 2007, Fox News was claiming that George W. Bush had created the greatest economy ever. Guess what? It collapsed. In 2010, Fox News, I still remember, they were saying that Obamacare would be hated by the masses. 2020, COVID was a hoax, right? It was invented by the Chinese government or by the Democratic Party. COVID was just the flu, and take malaria pills. Remember on Fox News, all these commentators talk about malaria pills as a possible cure for COVID after claiming that COVID was just the flu, after claiming that COVID didn't exist. So right-wing media have been wrong for 20 years, and more than 20 years. And guess what? They still have a stronger impact on voters than all the experts who have been right about all these things since the weapons of mass destruction all the way to COVID. And that's really hard for people like me to swallow. So personally, I think there are issues that are more important than the price of tomatoes, but again, the Democrats fail to explain it. Climate change disappeared from the conversation. The Palestinian genocide, don't talk about it because we are allied with Israel no matter what kind of demented prime minister they have. Single-use plastic disappeared from the discussion, one of the biggest problems in my opinion of today's world. The oil economy, we're still stuck with it, and guns. And by the way, in geopolitics, the nuclear threat on North Korea, the one country that can really uh, attack the United States is North Korea, and totally disappeared from the discussion. So Trump is president, and he started with he wants to have tariffs on every country that has a surplus with the trade surplus with the United States. He wants Greenland and the Panama Canal. Canada is a 51st state. All these things sounds preposterous, but again, we have to be careful that a lot of people actually like somebody who sounds so disruptive and seems to have ideas. I mean, you can think they're stupid ideas, but he has ideas. Which ideas have the Democrats presented to the country to change the course of the country? He wants to deploy the army to the southern border. Well, what other options have the Democrats come up with? The wall. He wants to finish the wall. The Democrats now never explain why we shouldn't build the wall. The first thing that Trump is probably going to do is reverse a Biden policy that allowed 1 million refugees to settle in the United States legally. Some of these things, it's common sense. If people are very, very angry about illegal immigration, why do you allow the 1 million refugees into the country? Maybe there are other ways to defend these 1 million refugees. Trump wants to designate international cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. Somebody has to explain to me why Biden hasn't done that, why Obama didn't do it, why Trump himself didn't do it in the first term. I mean, why international cartels that kill a lot of people and cause a lot of trouble in a lot of countries are not terrorist organizations, and Hamas is, Hezbollah is. Who has Hezbollah killed outside of Israel and Lebanon? Compared with the drug cartels, I'm not saying Hezbollah is not a terrorist organization. Well, we can argue forever, actually, the degree of terrorism. Netanyahu is a terrorist, in my opinion. Anyway, cryptocurrency. Trump launched his own cryptocurrency. It's interesting. A few years ago, the government wanted to kill blockchain and this whole world. And Trump is supported by Elon Musk, that has a lot of support in Silicon Valley and by probably young people who look up to successful businessmen. On the other hand, Biden is leaving us in a very disappointing way. He will go down as the president who pardoned his own son, who issued preemptive pardons to people threatened by Trump, General Mark Milley, the scientist Anthony Fauci, all the members of the committee that investigated the January 2021 insurrection. Biden almost makes it sound like these people committed crimes, and these were heroes, patriots, and now they are pardoned of what? On the other hand, Trump so far goes down in history as the president who came back, fought against a coordinated effort to put him in prison, survived an assassination attempt, and all of this while he was even underfunded compared with Kamala Harris, and he still won. So we have to recognize the facts. My analysis remained that number one reason he won is that he was running against a woman, and the United States is not ready for a female president, no matter who she is. But still, the result of these elections for people like me are pretty devastating. I wrote an article titled "Why Part of Me Hopes That Trump Wins," because if Trump lost, we would still have Trump claiming there was fraud, the election was stolen. It would go on another 4 years, and then it would run again, and then it would have the same situation, the same whining forever. Now he's president, and we'll see how it does. If he does well, I'll be very happy to admit I was wrong. If he proves to be a complete idiot and a corrupt politician, people will realize that we were right, just as we were right about the financial crisis in 2007 and the COVID and many other things. But so far Trump won more than just the election.